I'm going to tell a story here back in around 1960 time frame, maybe late 1950s, early 1960s. My dad and I went fishing up at a high mountain lake there in eastern Oregon, where we lived at that time. My dad worked at a sawmill community called Bates, Oregon, and we had a couple of lakes that was his favorite to go fishing into. There in Grant County, eastern Oregon, one of the lakes was out of Prairie City, Oregon, hop, skip, and a jump over the mountains, and it was called Strawberry Lake. And then a lake higher up from that is called Slide Lake. And Slide Lake was my dad's favorite. This is a smaller lake than Strawberry Lake, a lot less shallow. And there were native fish, whether they be Dolly Varden. They were very much like a brook trout. Could have been a Dolly Varden. My dad never really knew what kind of a species they were, but they had pink meat, and that's what made those fish taste so good. They were native, had been planted there years and years ago, and boy, were they tasty. And they were good fighters too. And so if to this day, if you want to go up to Slide Lake, there's two different ways to go in there, but if you go from the Prairie City, Oregon side, you go up to the Strawberry Campground, park your car, that's as far as you can go, and then you walk uphill to Strawberry Lake, which is mile and a half, doing switchbacks, maybe a little longer than that, I don't remember now, but basically halfway to Strawberry Lake, there's another trail that peels off the trail going to Strawberry Lake, and it says Slide Lake. And so you start taking that trail, and it winds up the side of a steep canyon, timbered canyon, and then it does a second switchback and does a third switchback, and finally you get at the top of that canyon wall. You're at the top. And then you start heading back the way you've come on the other side of the canyon, and you meander up that canyon, and eventually it'll take you to Slide Lake. Slide Lake sits at the bottom of rock cliffs, as picturesque as just about anything you could possibly imagine. You have colored lichens of green and orange and reddish, yellowish on those rocks. The sun comes up, it hits those rocks, and it glistens like jewels. It's gorgeous. Eagles soaring around up there. But that trip would be a 3-hour, 4-hour hike, very demanding, and we didn't carry much going in there other than our fishing gear and a lunch, and then we would be out of there at dark. My dad never had any intentions of sleeping overnight, because to do that comfortably, it required way too much carrying of equipment. So what we would do is get up very early in the morning and be there at Strawberry Campground a couple hours before daybreak, take off by flashlight, and be up at the top of that initial ridge about daybreak. And there you'd want to rest 10-15 minutes, because the walking was all uphill. Very, very challenging, even, for those who are in shape. And, oh man, back in those days, they had mule deer. They had Boone and Crockett racks of mule deer. Not a lot, but you'd see them up there high shortly after daybreak feeding if you were careful. Oh, we'd watch 3, 4, 5 of those big old huge muley bucks. Never saw them in rifle season. They were too smart, but you could see them there when we would go up in the summer and fish. And so from that point, we would huff it as quick as we could huff it into Slide Lake, fish the day, try to get our limits, which we usually did, clean the fish, and then hoof it back out of there, back down to where our car was. And usually it was, depending on when we left Slide Lake, it would be after dark before we got back to our car. But if we left a little earlier, caught our limit, got out of there at a decent time, we'd be back in our car by dark. So that was basically the routine when we went into Slide Lake. My dad didn't have a boat, a rubber raft that he could use, and that was ideal to fish that lake. It really was, especially if a breeze came up. It usually came from the west and blew east, and you catch, a light ripple on the west side and just let it float you to the east side across that lake, and you could catch fish all day long. Catch him mostly. He liked to catch the fish on woolly worms and royal coachman, but you could use a surface bait, a fly usually. As long as you had some ripples, those fish would hit all day long. And it didn't take too long to catch your limit. And so my dad, for whatever reason, wanted to try to have something he could float on, so he made a makeshift wooden raft out of some old soaked up logs there, tied them together with a rope, and decided he was going to use that as a boat to fish out there on that water. I didn't go out, but he did. But so he wouldn't get his leather boots all wet, he took his boots off because the logs sunk down in the water, being water soaked. They went down 3 or 4 or 5 inches into the water, enough to keep him up, and enough to let him catch fish. But what he did with his boots off, he had his bare feet showing all the while he was out there, and he got sunburned really bad. He didn't realize the degree that his feet was burning. So when he got done catching his limit and he came in and get ready to go walking back, his feet hurt him so bad he couldn't walk. He really burnt those feet. So the plan was to spend the night and see how his feet were the next day, and we would slowly walk back, having all day long to huff it back. And so up there, you're in high alpine country. There's no such thing as a comfortable spruce tree to cut a big limb off that's got a lot of needles. Lay down on that baby, grab 5, 6, 7, 10 of those, and lay down. You got yourself a pretty makeshift bed. Nah, these alpine trees up there are sparse for needles. Got a big shafts going out, and very few needles on them. There's nothing up there that makes for a good bed to lay on all night long. Makeshift, in other words. But we did cut some boughs, build a fire, and attempted to sleep. And that's where the story gets challenging. You're up there, oh man, well, there's snow still at the time we were up there in the pockets that hadn't melted off yet. But that country, when you get high in eastern Oregon, the air's thin, and it can be 75 degrees during the day if you got sunshine out, and it can drop right down to 25, 30 degrees by 2 o'clock in the morning. And if you don't have something to keep you warm, it's for a miserable night. Well, that's what happened that night. Man, we shivering cold. All we had was a light jacket that we walked up there with, and we had no blankets. We had no means of staying warm other than the clothes we had on our back, because we had no intention of spending the night up there, so we didn't prepare for it. So we're laying on those old alpine bough limbs, trying to get comfortable, trying to get warm. And the wind come up and was blowing that fire out, and so we would alternate putting limbs on that fire to try to get some heat. Well, get heat, you had to get close, get a fire, and then you're getting so hot you're getting almost burned, and cinders blowing around there, might get in your face. And well, on the backside of you, it was freezing cold. So you'd toss and turn and try to get your backside warmed up enough, and then you're facing away against the fire, so the front side's cold, so you flip back over toward the flames, and you roast that side like a slow marshmallow roast all night long, right? Oh, it was getting miserable. Well, if that wasn't bad enough, here comes the porcupines. The porcupines are hungry. The porcupines never get a visit tourists at nighttime up there hardly at all. Porcupines wanted to get warm. Porcupines wanted to be close to the fire and close to us. Let me tell you, it's not a pleasant experience to open your eye. You got a little bit of flame in the background from the fire, and you see this big blob 6 inches from your nose. A porcupine. Oh, man. Get me out of here. Well, we had a flashlight. We'd chase a 3 or 4 or 5 of those porcupines would come in there. They'd be around us. We never got hit by porcupine quills. We got out of there before they could maybe panic and get us if we spooked them. Let's get out of there. We didn't go anywhere. It's just we scared them off. And then we lay back down and try to get warm by that fire, put a little more firewood on it, just falling off to half sleep. And here comes the porcupines again, right in front of your face. They'd be grunting a little bit, I don't know, begging for something to eat, I suppose. And so get back up, chase the porcupines off into oblivion, go back to sleep. You're trying to go back to sleep. Here comes the porcupines. We did that routine, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 times. And there was no sleeping because them porcupines were not going to give up. Well, here comes the fun part. If you made it this far, here comes the fun part. My dad loved to pay somebody to get M80s out of state near fireworks time. You couldn't buy them anymore in Oregon. They were outlawed. But I think in Idaho or Wyoming or someplace they still sold them at that time. So my dad would make provisions for somebody that was going there prior to 4th of July. Anytime, pick him up some M80s. And though he didn't have a lot of money to buy a lot of them, they were wonderful because those M80s, you can't get an M80, to my knowledge, the way you could back in those days. Those M80s were like 1/8 of a stick of dynamite, I think. We'd blow up stumps and stuff with those M80s packed right. And so he had some M80s, and when things got slow, he liked to go down there in the river that left Slide Lake and went down through the meadow, and then was a waterfall that then went on down into the canyon below. And so he'd look in some shallower water and see a few fish over there playing around, and he'd like take them M80s and light it and throw it out there, hit the water. Now those M80s would sink down. They had the weight, but they would burn, their fuse would burn underwater. Well, you throw that M80 out, and them dumb little fish would come over. Well, you throwing me some bait? Look at that. That's pretty cool. And it fizzles. All of a sudden, kaboof, and a plume of water comes up. And the concussion stuns those fish. Some might die, some might survive. But sometimes when fishing was tough, we'd get our fish that way. Now, it was illegal, but it was fun to watch, something to do. Dad loved to do it. I loved to do it. Every kid, every boy loves shooting off firecrackers, right? So it was fun. So we had some of those M80s. So we decided this is enough with the porcupines. So I held the light on the porcupines, and Dad started lighting these M80s and letting the fuse burn down and throw it in front of them stupid porcupines. And man, that blast would go off, and big old ball of fire in the dark. You'd hear them old porkies squeal, and pretty soon you shine the light on, and porcupine quills were blown off here and there and everywhere. We went through that about 3 times before those porcupines finally got the hint. They were not invited to our campfire. We had no food for them. Go survive away from us. But it seemed like daybreak before we ever could get rid of those porcupines. We had porcupine quills. And porcupine, we almost blew up most of their quills. I don't know if they ever survived. But you think they'd quit? No, they would not quit. Those were the most persistent porcupines we'd ever seen, and probably starving, wanted food. They didn't care about the heat. So we survived the next day. Dad made it out slowly. His old feet blistered up in the days to come. But that was an incredible, most miserable night that I can remember in my whole life. Because you were so hot on one side and so cold on the other. And if that wasn't bad enough, then the porcupines want to go put your eyes out. Not fun.